Hello, this video is to give you some information that you'll need during the year as interns related to preparing a resume, thinking about cover letters and letters of reference, also preparing for interviews and job search, and ultimately this actually looks forward to January of this year, January, February, where you'll actually have an opportunity to do mock interviews in your preparation for doing real interviews and looking for your first job. So what I want to do with this video is give you a list of materials, and I'll guide you through some of those materials with this video so that you can be thinking about how to prepare yourself. We will be scheduling an opportunity for you to actually meet face-to-face to work on your materials. But these materials I'm giving to you ahead of time should make you feel better prepared, or maybe even fully prepared enough to go ahead and begin work on these materials yourself. As always, I encourage you as interns to call me, text me. I am text friendly. Schedule a meeting with me to go over any of these materials as you try to prepare for seeking your first administrative position. So without any further introduction, I'd like to bring up a few documents and guide you through those. They're much more extensive than the brief introduction I'm giving to you with this video introduction. I encourage you to look through all these documents with some detail as you set up files and resume templates for yourself and think about doing job interviews. So I'll change the format here now, and I'll bring up a few documents. The first document I'd like to share with you is something that comes out of our Western Washington University Career Center. I think that this document is well put together, has some excellent information, but I'll highlight just a few things. I will be sending you all these documents along with this video, and if you have any problem opening the documents, let me know and I'll try to send them to you in a different format. First one is resumes and cover letters for educators. Again, you can see this is out of the Career Center. There are a lot more materials here than you will be able to consume at one time. I suggest that you use this guide as a tool as you move forward in starting your work on your resume and continuing it through to actual delivery of your resume with applications. The first thing I'd like to point out here is that usually one page is what's expected for a new college graduate, but you guys are not new college graduates. You have experience and extensive resume as educators in the classroom. So I think that, as it points out here, is that you may need as many as 2 pages. I really encourage you not to go over 2 pages for your resume as you're looking for your first administrative position, and one of the reasons is because resumes don't get a lot of time during a screening, a paper screening. So if you can limit it to 2 pages with major content, you'll have more of a chance of getting the key information that you think is important up in front of someone's eyes, and they'll see it. If you move it to 3-4 pages, then they're going to start flipping through the pages and just scanning. Second thing is you do want to do it in a chronological format. Third thing that they identify here is you want to make sure that you have obviously all your pertinent information, name, address, phone number. But if you have developed a website, and that's becoming more popular now, you can give your website address. If you have a main objective, that objective is to highlight your information at the very top so that it becomes more visible. And a lot of times what people do is bold that information at the top. You'll see many examples of that when you get to the example resumes in some of the materials I have here. It used to be that everybody highlighted an objective, and I would say to you, as the Career Center does here, is that highlighting an objective on this resume is probably not that important, because you're going to be applying for specific positions, and your resume is basically an introduction, and you'll generally have to do a letter of introduction or a letter of application where you can be more specific about your objective. On your resume, you obviously want to have your certification. For those of you in this program, what you're going to be putting is your certificate type, which is going to be a state residency certificate for administration. Most of you, as you're applying starting in January, so you will not have your certificate yet, and so you're going to just list the date that you anticipate the completion and the possession of that certificate. For most of you, that's going to be somewhere around July of the year you're finishing your program. Educational background. You may also want to list any outside training you received, such as special workshops or seminars. So obviously you'll have all of your education background put there, but if you've had some unique workshops training you, say for instance you've done extensive training with TPEP in a workshop, let's say you've done extensive training with social and emotional learning or PBIS, those kinds of things, you also want to list those as special trainings. In this particular document, they talk about teaching and related experience. As you can see in my note here, I think you want to label first a leadership experience, and you want to make sure that you use your internship and anything else that's leadership related and highlight that first before you list your teaching experience. This resume should be a leadership resume and not a teacher resume, and there's dramatic differences between a teacher resume and a leadership resume in the sense that you're highlighting all of your leadership skills and abilities. So list your leadership experience, and then you want to move to listing briefly, as I've said here, briefly list then your teaching experience. After you've listed your leadership experience and your teaching experience, you may, as I've highlighted here, you may want to have related leadership experience. If you have coaching experience, that might be the place where you list it. If you have civic leadership experience, you might want to list that civic leadership experience. If you have leadership in professional organizations, that's where you would probably want to highlight that as well. You want to have key qualifications, and again, this is optional. If a particular position that you're applying to does not have you do a letter of application where you can specifically tie the letter to the qualifications they're asking for in the job announcement, you might consider putting in your resume. I find that key qualifications is not something that I typically want to encourage an intern to put on their resume, because you will have that opportunity in a letter of application. And additionally, trying to put all this, the key qualifications that you might have, it will probably run your resume longer than 2 pages. Activities, honorships, and memberships, very brief section, should not be more than a few lines. Community activities, likewise, should be just a few lines. The other thing I want to highlight in this particular document is that when you're writing your resume, you really want to focus in on action verbs. The Career Center here is giving you an extensive list of action verbs. In addition to that, they've given you key adjectives that are very powerful words. You want to make sure that you review your language after you've done a draft, and you go in and you highlight language that talks about achievement leadership, and here's some examples. Words that I find especially strong for a resume, words related to administration and management, is chaired, coordinated, developed, directed, headed, managed, mobilized, organized, oversaw, planned, produced, scheduled, supervised, and unified. There are a lot of ways that we typically refer to those kinds of activities that are used fairly weak words. I encourage you to look at your resume as you're working on it and integrate these kinds of words into the document. Additionally, here are some additional words I find that without having this document in front of you, oftentimes as you're writing you might use other words that aren't as powerful. So I encourage you to use this and look at these kinds of words. You have a whole bunch of words here that are strong action words related to teaching, and again the adjectives. Here is something that I find it could be very helpful to you. The Career Center said use the WAT plus formula for trying to translate duties into the skills that you might have as a leader. You have lots of duties that you perform as teachers and as beginning leaders, especially during your internship. And I think if you create a bullet points that begin with a strong verb and emphasize the skills or qualities required in the next job you seek, if you do that, you will capture the reader much more fully. Look through this. They actually give you some guidance on how to do this. If you use this worksheet, it might be very helpful in creating your resume. The other thing the Career Center does is highlights that you want to have a balance of material. They talk about margins here. They also, talking about you want to have something that's pleasing to the eye. Now, what's pleasing to one person may be not as graphically pleasing to another. So this is important to think about as you look at the sample resumes that I'm going to share with you later. Some of this is going to be, what the professionals in the field recommend, and some of this is going to be based on your own style and character. So you're going to need to make some judgments about it. But some key things that are not left up to your style of judgment are things like misspellings and typos. You want to be brutal with yourself and look at your material and make sure it's absolutely error-free. This means proofreading often, and you also want to have other people look at it because, as highlighted here, it's very often, even as a former English teacher and someone who does a lot of writing myself, we become what I call text blind. When you've written something and you worked on it so hard, oftentimes your eyes just scan over mistakes and you can't see them. So have some other individuals that can proofread your material for you as well. I really encourage you to use the WWU Career Center's resume building site. I'm going to show it to you here in just a moment. I'm going to bring that site up for you. But at the bottom of that page, there's a lot of recorded training videos about how to do resumes and things that could be helpful to you. They're pretty extensive. One of them I know is over an hour long, so you might want to just skim through it until you find a section that looks important to you to use. The other thing is I'm going to show you how you would log into that. So let me move to that right now. The Career Center site looks like this. What you're going to want to do is scan down to the bottom, and you're going to look for the Build a Resume Online section tab on the Career Center's site. Again, here is the address to the Career Center so you can find it easily. When you click on that site, what you'll see right away is the resume builder, and then again the recorded trainings I was just talking about. quickly show you the recorded trainings. Here you have recorded. This is actually going to be a live webinar. It's happening September 27th on Resume Builder website. Job Seekers Portfolio Skills and Assessment is another webinar you might be interested in. But the things that I thought you'd be most interested in is here is a demonstration of how to build what they call the optimal resume, and optimal is referring to some of their materials from their organization. Here is a resume builder tutorial, styles, styling for your resume, and a few other things you might be interested in. I'm going to click on just the first one, the demonstration of optimal resume. Again, here you can see this is an hour and over an hour long. I reviewed it. There's some good information in there. I personally found some of it to be obvious to those of you that are looking for administrative positions because you've been teachers for a long time and in your chosen career for a long time. So some of this is pretty basic and elementary, but there are a few things in there you might find helpful. Close this for you. So there are the example of recorded trainings. The resume builder samples. I'm going to click on that for you. You can follow the same link. If you come to this particular place, many students over the years I've worked with on resumes ask, well, give me some examples, give me some templates. So the Career Center has a lot of these. I encourage you, you can look at all of them if you want, just to see how people set pages up and use white space and graphics, etc. But I'm going to take you specifically to the section that I think is most helpful. You do have a management with 6 examples here. I go right past that one because they did not seem to be as directed as you will want. Here is the place where you want to click, is management. You see there's 52 examples. You have entry-level examples, mid-career, and experienced. I'm going to click on the mid-career examples because they actually have some school administrative posts. Here's your education administrators posts. So here's an example of a resume that sort of meets many of the criteria that you're going to be wanting to look for. You know, highlighted, bolded name at the top, your actual physical address, email, phone number. If I personally were to put a website in on this one, it would be right underneath my name. I would have my website so that it would be live. Most people are accepting these letters electronically now, so it could be a live link so they could go to your web page if they chose to do so. Here it's listed as a higher ed administrator. You wouldn't have that section, but you would start off with your professional experience as is listed here. Notice how they've used section heading and it's consistent. You have capitalized and bolded for a section. You have a secondary section that's still bolded to highlight information. So just make sure that you're using consistent style. The other thing I really like this is that this is not completely text gray. There's some white space included in here. It's a little more text gray as you move on down to the bottom. But again, the use of the graphics and the bold helps direct the eye. So here's an example that you might want to look at. It's a single page. I would think that most of you are going to end up at 2 pages for your resumes. It's one example. Let's click that one off. Here's another example. Let me scroll down through it. I think it's on the 2nd page. No, that's the same one. It's the experience level. At the experience level here, you got CEOs, Here's another example, education administrator's post. Again, slightly different in style. My personal style is more like this, where I'm using center justification for sections. This particular person actually is an educational consultant. Areas of expertise are listed, professional experience listed. The thing I like about this one most is I think that having the major headings in the middle, bolded and capitalized, allows a person to quickly scan down and see sections with the secondary headings on this side. Just sets up visually for me personally. I like this style. List their university educational experience here, with key accomplishments. Selected publications and presentations are listed as well. If you do have any publications or presentations that you've done professionally, I encourage you to list those as well. So I'm not going to take any more time to go through examples or resumes, but there are lots of examples here for you to look through to pick up ideas and styles that you may find helpful. So that's the Career Center. The last thing on the Career Center, let me go back to the home page for the Career Center. They actually give you the option to use a template. You saw I just clicked on the sign in. Let me go back so that I can highlight that for you one more time. This is their main page at the Career Center. Down on the bottom left, it says get started using a template for creating your resume. If you click the get started, it's going to ask you to validate that you're a student user. This is your Western Washington email address, so all of you, because you're Western students, have access to this tool. I encourage you to at least look at it. If you like using templates and you're having fillable boxes for content, you may find this useful. So, another tool for you to use. At the Western Washington University Career Center. The other thing I'd like to highlight from the first handout that I will be sending to you is that it also has some examples of resumes. Here's one specifically looking at endorsement in elementary education, shows certification, education, teaching competencies. Again, remember, since you're doing a leadership resume, you would highlight your leadership experience and leadership competencies first. Here's an example. Here's another example. This particular one I don't like as much because you have a great big bold large letters here, and the sections are smaller. I really like having the largest type with sections first instead of the way it's listed here, but again, it's just another style. Here's another one, just to change the style. This one does not use the bolding, which I would think that, for instance, certification here kind of gets lost when it's not bolded, but it's just another example. This one I do like the fact that they've used bullets to highlight some areas. Here's another example. So there are several examples in this document that you might want to look at and see what particular style jumps out at you. Writing an effective cover letter or a letter of application. They do give you some guidance here for that as well, but I'd like to highlight again the thing that they really emphasize, something that's very, very important, is it needs to be perfect when it comes to spelling, grammar, and punctuation. So use some wonderful friends who care about you, family who care about you, and ask them to help you read your material and help you edit. Most of you, as I said earlier, will be doing a letter of application or a cover letter. Also, you want to make sure that cover letter addresses each of the qualifications and the skills that are in the job description. You make sure that you touch on those in your letter of application. That's what the letter of application is for. Oftentimes, as a former principal and a superintendent, it's a letter of application that got my attention more than the resume. So when you're doing your letter of application, make sure you look at the job description, you look at the qualifications listed and the skills listed as desirable, and in that letter of application addressed each of those in a succinct manner. Your letter of application typically is going to be 1 page. Sometimes you can get away with 2 pages. I think that's all I highlighted in this. Oh, here's an example of a cover letter. Again, it's kind of an open-ended, generic one, but it gives you an example that you can look at. Okay, so that's the first document that I've put in for you. Look over it, and I think you'll find some useful information. The next document I'd like to point out to you that I'll be sending to you is what I call links to resume workshops and other material that you might find helpful. Give it a moment to load up here. Sometimes computers are slow. I know you found that. Well, that's not going to come up. Let me put it to the side and let it work while I bring up a third document. The third document I want to highlight for you is job search checklists for students. Again, this is from the Western Washington's Career Center. You can see at the bottom here his phone number in case you want to contact them and talk with them, because they do provide some additional services that you might want to use. This is a job search checklist. I want to point out to you that typically you'll start seeing jobs show up for assistant principal's jobs or principal's jobs somewhere around about January, which is why I'm presenting you this material now, so you can be well ahead of the game. The first step here, they say, is know yourself, talking about your personal strengths, skills, interests, and values. Again, this is where you want to use your LSI 1 and 2, as well as your own self-reflection and input from others that know you well. So think about your skills and interests and know what you want to highlight in a future position. The other thing listed here is identify top 3 geographic areas where you'd like to work. That's a really important consideration. Is before you start going to look for position, make sure you talk to yourself and talk to your loved ones that will be with you about how far are you willing to travel to go to work? Are you willing to move? Those are really important things as you begin to think about your job search. Here it says register with Viking Career Link Center. I'd encourage you more to continue to be looking at AWSP's Job Jar online. So if you've not done that before, go on the internet, look at AWSP's site, and search for their job listings under Job Jar. That's where you'll start seeing things listed. Again, I've encouraged you to, as you write your resume and you look at your cover letters, that you have trusted friends and loved ones that could help you edit. But also notice here that the Career Center at Western also offers a review service. You might want to take advantage of that. You want to think about who you're going to want to serve as your reference. They encourage at least 3 references for a resume. There's some debate about how many people you should list as references. I think 3 is a good number. I think 10 is way too many. Nobody's going to look at that many. Some people would argue for as many as 5 in case reference checkers have a hard time getting in touch with someone. But I encourage you to make sure that those individuals you ask to serve as your references, you talk to them about when you're applying. They know when you're applying, so they would be expecting calls. One of those individuals should be your current supervising principal, or someone you've worked with some time that knows your skills. You have developed your interview skills. I really encourage you to practice interview questions. I have a document that I'll show you in just a moment that has 52 practice questions, and they're really good questions. The Career Center has a list of some questions that are okay. You may see in connection to a video that I'll share with you later a list of additional questions that EdAdmin here at Western has used for a number of years, but I found another document that I feel has questions that are more relevant to what's happening in schools, and I'll show those to you in a bit. But again, you want to ask friends and loved ones, maybe even just classmates, to sit down and go through these questions. Treat it as an interview. They'll ask you the questions, they'll listen to your questions and give you some feedback about how you did. That kind of a practice and discussion atmosphere will serve you well. So do mock interviews as much as you can. We will be scheduling mock interviews for you as well, but doing your own practice is a good idea. Let's see. Also notice here that the Career Center will also do mock interviews. You can take some of the questions that I'm going to share with you and let them use those. They will be, obviously this is what they do quite often. They'll be able to give you a lot of feedback about your communication style, your poise, your dress, all those kinds of things. And do notice here, they do say, you need to think about what you're wearing. I personally think that professional business attire is important when you're doing interviewing. You want to go dressed as best you can, presenting a professional business persona. If you happen to have an email address that is not professional, I would encourage you to think about establishing an email address that is professional and neutral. A number of years ago, I remember getting a resume from an individual whose email address was a Hotmail email address, and it referred to this individual in words that were not flattering, definitely were not professional, and it really caused me to pause and think about whether I'd want this individual, how this individual's decision making would be related to other professional behavior in the work environment. So just think about that. As you start doing a job search, you're going to often find that you have multiple applications going out, and I really encourage you to have a tracking system to make sure you know where you've applied. And a key thing is to keep in mind is if you're using a template for cover letters, that you read those very, very closely. I have seen many times while I'm screening papers, someone applying for a position in my district, but they had a different district's name embedded in the letter because they just didn't proofread it well. So that's something that you want to make sure you pay attention to when you start your job search as well. Encourage you to think about networking events, professional organizational meetings. Oftentimes getting out there and being in those networks and in those meetings will give you sometimes a heads up about positions that are coming. So this is a good document. I encourage you to take a look at it. So now related to the practicing interviews, I do have a document that I'd like to share with you. and this will also be coming to you. This is 52 practice interview questions for school administrators, specifically for school administrators. This I was able to find from the Principal Center. The Principal Center, I am not advocating that as a professional source that you should look into. It just happens to be that I found that the questions that were made available by this organization were really good ones, and I'm going to highlight a few of them. Framing leadership, these are some of the kinds of questions that I actually have used myself over the years while as a principal hiring assistants, while as a superintendent hiring principals as well. Typical starting question you'll see here is tell us about your professional background and why you're interested in becoming a school leader. Why are you interested in this particular position? Sometimes they'll say, why are you interested in this particular school district? Move on down. There's lots of different questions here. Here's a question that talks about what you want to accomplish in the first 30, 60, 90 days. As you see here, I've noted that some districts now are using a formal entry plan. If you're not familiar with what an entry plan is, I encourage you to go on the internet and do a bit of research, and then you'll be able to address the concept of an entry plan. Moving on down, lots of really good questions that you want to look at. This one I really particularly like. What does the ideal school culture look like, and what would you do to create that kind of culture? Obvious questions like philosophy of education are there. Moving on down the list, you see there's lots of questions. Here is one I've highlighted specifically because this one shows up quite often. Give an example of a situation in which you dealt with a conflict between two staff members. What did you do to resolve the conflict, and what did you learn from the experience? What would you do differently if you could do it over again? That or some form of that question seems to pop up quite regularly in interviews nowadays. Another one that seems to show up quite a bit is describe a challenging situation involving an irate parent or family member. How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the situation? That or some other sort of form of that question shows up quite regularly. Here's another question. How would you communicate with your staff about a district decision with which you disagree? Believe it or not, I think you will see some sort of question that will be trying to get at that concept. And you oftentimes, not oftentimes, but there will be a period in your career where that will actually happen. Moving on down through the questions. Another one I want to highlight is, what is your experience working with students from diverse backgrounds? How does diversity impact student learning? You should expect some sort of question related to diversity and student learning and differentiation. These have to do with discipline. Here are questions about running a school effectively. I'm moving down because I know here it is. Parents and community. Describe your approach to engaging families with diverse cultural and socioeconomic and linguistic backgrounds. Almost a required question now in interviews. Here's one about improvement in teaching and learning. I highlight several because I think that you will probably see questions like this. How would you create a professional development plan for the year? What information would you gather, and what steps would you take to create the plan? What do you believe are the key characteristics of effective teaching, and how do you support technology integration in the classroom? Again, I think if you use this document, you will find that you're well prepared for what you might see out in an interview. Now for the other document that was having a hard time coming up. It still has not come up, so I'm going to try to reload it. Looks like I'm having a problem with Microsoft Word on my computer right now. Okay, so finally pulled up the document. Microsoft Word was giving me a problem. I had to open it in safe mode and then close it and reopen it. But here's the document. This is a link to a YouTube recording of a speaker we had a couple of years ago that talks about many of the things that I went through using the Western Washington University Career Center's documents. I encourage you to take a look at this video. This is individual is Beth Clothier. She is works for the LaConner School District, and she has done this presentation not only in 2016 for the first time, she also did it last year, 2017. This is currently scheduled, and you should be receiving a notice pretty soon from the program about the date set for this resume workshop. It's typically on a Saturday. I think it's going to be somewhere around about the 17th of November. So if you would like to have a hands-on opportunity to listen to someone else talk through these resume building ideas and materials, then you'll have the opportunity to go there, and then an opportunity also on site to begin working on your resume there as well. The reason I've sent all this material ahead of time is that I wanted you to have the ability to differentiate for yourself. You may be an individual who wants to see this material earlier on, which this gives you an opportunity to do. You may be an individual who really wants examples in front of you to manipulate and play with prior to a workshop. This gives you that opportunity. And also, you may be an individual who says, I just want the material and I'll work on it independently. This gives you that option. But the other option you have is to actually attend the workshop live, or to review the previous workshop she's presented. So you would just simply click on this link here. I'm going to give you an example of what's at that workshop. I'll pull it up for you right now.
Okay, well, it's my task to interview. I can tell you that I've known Beth for many, many, many years, and can tell you that you're in for a quality experience with her. She's a really quality. Beth spent a stint in her life, and I always get this a little bit wrong, and she can correct me. She worked in private industry, in the tech industry, for a time. And then came back into education. She started off with a degree in education. And your advanced degree is in...
I'm a master's in library and information science from the University.
Okay. So she took those skills that she took out of private industry and working in the tech industry, and she's continually blended those in education. So she is a person who is my go-to editor, and lots of people's go-to editor. She is, upon occasion, you can hire her if you've got a big project going, if you're working on your doctorate or something. She is the queen of APA, I can tell you that much, and the queen of any research if you're researching a certain topic, especially in education. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the capable hands of Beth Clothier.
Hopefully.
Do you want this?
So my goal is to not use the mic. Do you feel like I need it? Is it okay if I don't use it? No. If I'm not being loud enough, will you let me know?
Use your playground voice, Beth.
Use my playground. If I'm not being loud enough, I'd be happy to pick the mic up. I just prefer not to if I can get away with it. So as Tim said, my name is Beth Clothier. I am first and foremost a librarian. I am the district librarian at LaConner School District. I've been there for...
Clear to everyone?
Is anybody else having login issues, or are you able to get online?
Yeah, it's not responding.
It may have filled out.
There's a password.
Okay, I just wanted to show you the quality of the video. You can see that it's about an hour long, highlighted right here. And again, she goes through many of the same basic concepts that I presented to you earlier. Then we actually record her going around and actually helping individuals, giving suggestions and guidance on their individual development of their resumes. So you can go through this. After doing so, then you have an opportunity to decide how best to differentiate for your own learning style by using this video or going to the live presentation that she'll be doing toward the middle to end of November. Again, you will see that coming. Anyway, so that's the first link that I've given to you. Here's a second link. This is the online writing lab for Purdue University. I think that this is a really powerful site. As you see, listed here. It's a one-stop source that covers everything: job search, applications, resumes, interviews. A lot of it's very general, so you'd have to contextualize it to education administration, but I think you will find that that site's very useful. And then this particular one I found was useful, and I'm going to pull it up for you real quickly. Some people would argue that these are the top 5 interview questions that you may see. And these are specifically for administrators. The first one is, why do you want to be a school administrator? Some examples of how you might answer that question are listed there. What are your professional goals for the next 5 or 10 years? Again, they give you some guidance about how to answer that question. Describe how you would deal with budget cuts. Something that's very important to be able to answer in considering how education is funded in the state of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and really nationwide now. How would you engage students' parents as active participants in their children's education? With some examples of how to answer it. And last, why would we hire you over other applicants who have similar backgrounds? I've had, just in the last 3 years, I've had students who were interns of mine call me and talk about this question because they did face it in interviews. So those are some questions you might face with some examples of how you might address it. So that's another link. So it's a document that will be coming along with this video. Don't save. So with that being presented to you, I just want to wrap up by saying I'm always available. I'm available 7 days a week, not quite 24 hours a day, but I'm text friendly, pretty quick usually with getting texts back to individuals, and you can call me up pretty much any time between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock any day of the week, and if I'm not available, then I would be back to you pretty quickly. So as you start launching into preparing your resume, thinking toward applying for jobs, please use me. Even with other faculty members, if you're in their classes, if you have quick questions that occur to you, approach them after class. Ask them those questions. We all have interns as part of our desire to serve. We not only teach classes, but we all are supervising internships, so feel free to talk to any of us during this year as you're preparing. If you have questions before we meet for our first meeting, which I've sent you a separate email about, make sure you just give me a call. Thank you.